today we're going to make this relatively simple ground texture with puddles. And it's got kind of this little raindrop effect going on inside the puddles. And you can sort of deal with the number of iterations, so you can make it rain a little bit harder. And what we can also do is adjust the size of our puddles, so we can start drowning the ground out. And what we're doing here really, as far as making the masks for the puddles growing in the land versus the grass, is really stuff we've done over and over and over again. The two main things that are kind of different in this tutorial is, first of all, this effects map. And the other thing that I'm doing here is I'm combining Photoshop color with native substance noise color in a gradient map. And the reason I did this here is, I'll be honest, I have a lot of trouble making grass and other kind of organic ground cover that I'm happy with using just what they have in substance. It's much better for rocks and other sort of hard objects. So very often what I'll do is I'll just mix and match. And I'm not going to go into how to make a seamless color map in Photoshop. I've already got a tutorial. I think I even have 2 tutorials that deal with this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a link in the comments section. If you don't know how to make your own tiled texture, it's really simple. Just follow the tutorial and then join us back here. And what I am going to show you guys, though, is how to take this color map and create the normal map that you're going to need, and your roughness maps and all of this stuff. And some of that we'll do in Substance, and then some of it we'll do in Photoshop, depending on our needs, because certain things Photoshop handles better and certain things Substance handles better, and I very often combine the two in my workflow. So without further ado, let's get into Substance Designer, and we'll start by making the basic outlines of the puddles versus the land and the rocks versus the grass. And then once we've done that, we will get to the effects map that's going to deal with our little raindrops. Alright, so let's make a new substance, and I'm going to call it Puddles, and I'm going to keep it with the metallic roughness. And we'll come in here, and I want to see things a little clearer. I'm going to set this up as a 2K for the parent size. And the first thing I want to address is the puddle to dry ground ratio. I'm going to use clouds too. You're welcome to use whatever you want. I mean, right now we're just deciding what the maximum size / shape of our puddles is going to be. So clouds are good for that, because you can actually use a levels node to do that pretty easily with them. But, which clouds you use is entirely up to you, depending on what look you want to go for. And what I'm trying to do here is get it pretty, black and white. This is going to be a mask. And as I mentioned, I'm setting it for the absolute maximum size of my puddles. They're not going to get any bigger than this. So I think like that. And next, I'm going to get a bevel node, and I'm going to use this to make my puddles bigger and smaller. You can see how it's actually doing a pretty good job of that. If this is my maximum size up here, by adjusting this distance, I can get an awesome puddle, because not only does it sort of make it smaller or bigger, but it does it in such a way that you're getting kind of like this wet edge around it too. So this grayscale area will be sort of, as far as roughness and stuff like that goes, is going to be halfway between the two. So you have like this flat, deep stuff here with a nice edge. So that's always nice. I don't want it to go in the opposite direction. So when we make our input parameter, which we're going to do in a second, we're going to clamp it so that it can't go below 0. And let's decide how far up we want this to go. I think I'm going to clamp it between 0 and 0.5, because I do want some sort of puddleage. But we can fine-tune that once we actually start taking a look at it on here. Right, let's make our input parameter. We're going to come in here and we're going to do puddle size. I'm not putting that underscore in there on purpose and copying it because it's automatically going to give me that underscore, and I'm lazy and I can just paste it again for my label. We are going to make the minimum 0. We'll make the maximum 0.5. And we are going to clamp it. By default, it's set to false. So what that means is that the end user can override the numbers you've put in here by typing in other numbers if it's false. If you clamp it to true, the default, let's make the default 0.25. It's not going to allow any deviation from this, and that's why that default dropped from 1 to 0.25 the minute we clamped it, because it's just not allowed anymore. Okay, so let's come back to our bevel, and let's assign that to our distance. So we're going to change that to puddle size. Let's take a look. I'm going to grab a color here. We'll end up using this for our puddle color for the water. Maybe like that. And we've got, actually doing it the opposite way. I'm just going to put a white in here for now. And this just gives us a better visualization of what those puddles will look like. Yeah, so I think that's pretty good. So we can come double click back on our graph. I'm just going to look at this preview version of it. So this is at 0. And this is at the maximum. Now, you'll notice there's a problem here, that this is completely counterintuitive. If I want my puddle size at the highest, it's going backwards. So we just have to come in here and fiddle around. Now, I've demonstrated this before, and it's a pretty straightforward concept. I'm just going to reverse this by subtracting my variable from 1. And this, because both are numbers running between 0 and 1, essentially, what you're doing by subtracting the variable from 1 is that you're reversing that order. But what we've done here is that we've clamped it at 0.5. So this is actually going to, it'll work, but it'll look weird because it will be visibly only going through part of the range. But if I come in here and multiply this whole thing by 0.5, it's just going to take the whole thing and have it. So as far as the range of what people are actually sliding, it's going to make sense. So I'm going to set this as the output node, and we can try this again. So as it goes down now, they're getting smaller and smaller. And then as I bring this up to 0.5, actually I want to make this maximum 1 because we didn't have it before. I took care of this maximum inside here. This is where we cut it in half, and this is going to let the slider run from 0 to 1. So that's our full size now, and then we can make them smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's that mechanic done. Most of this here is temporary. I'm not going to mark it as anything. I'm just going to pull it off to the side. Because I want to keep working on those maps for our rocks and our grass. So I'm going to pull this out here. And I'm going to separate these out. And I'm going to start putting stuff up in between. Okay. I want to use this also for my rock base because I want this to kind of match. By using this levels here, we're accentuating the darker bits, and that creates a natural topology for whatever our height/normals are. So it makes sense to use it as a as a base for the rocks. It's just kind of boring though. So what I ended up doing was going into this cells 3. Is that the same one I have? That's the one I used. What's the difference? They're both called cells 3. Anyway, I like this darker one. There's just more to it. I think one of them is a legacy, the other one isn't. But this kind of looks like the beginnings of cracks on rocks. They're kind of thin though, I want them a little bit more accentuated. So I'm going to get a high quality blur, and we'll blur it ever so slightly. But what that's going to do is it's going to thicken them up a little bit. And then I'm going to get a warp. And let's see what happens if we warp it against this. Again, very, very slightly. Because right now they're like super straight and smooth, and I just kind of want to crinkle them up a little bit more. And now let's get them nice and dark. So we've kind of thickened out the line, we've crinkled it up, and now we can adjust the levels so we can actually see what's going on. There. And we're also going to need at one point or another an inverted version of this. So I'm just going to pull this out. And now we have either dark cracks on light or light cracks on dark, depending on what we need to use it for. And now we can go ahead and recombine it with sort of that undulating ground that we decided we're going to have. And let's try, see what happens when we do a multiply versus a darken. I'm going to go with the multiply. Before we decide on that, what is an overlay? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I want it to go darker. I don't want it to go lighter. So we'll do that. And then I want to add one more thing. I'm going to go back into my library and type in cells. Cells 3 and cells 4 are actually matching. These forms here match up with those lines. I just noticed that recently. So it's obviously based on the same underlying thing. They're just like doing different stuff to it. So as long as you keep all of these things the same, they should match up. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to blend this again. You know what? I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I think I'm going to blend these two guys first, not with a multiply. Let's try an overlay. Nah. Yeah, that's still a bit much. So I'm going to bring this opacity down. What I'm trying to get here is to have these individual sort of tops between the cracks do slightly different things. I think it makes for a more interesting rock. So I'll do that first, and then we can combine it. You know, we're probably going to need an inverse of this as well, so I'm going to get another one of those, and we'll kind of bring that down to the side. So these are kind of matching. You know, it's the same map, only inverted. And then let's blend the cracks on top of this. And now we can do it with the multiply. So what's happening now is that we've got, you know, if we're thinking about this as the basis of our height map, we've got the deeper cracks, but then the ground itself is also kind of not completely flat. And if it's going to dip down and do weird things, it's doing it with those exact, within the lines of those stone cracks. So that's, here is the basic sort of stone stuff. We're going to do some more to it eventually, but for right now I'm just going to frame it off, and we'll just call this rock base. I guess we could put that in there as well. And this we'll call our Puddle Mask. And now the only thing we have left to do is create another mask that's going to block out the difference between where the rock is and where the grass is. And again, I chose Clouds 1 because I just thought it's like it's choppier, but you can use whatever you want. It really depends on, you know, the kind of shapes you want to create. But we're going to do exactly the same thing here. We're going to put it into a levels node and, you know, just create these black and white areas. So the white is going to represent my grass, and the black is going to represent my rock. And then obviously if you want sort of more mixed up areas, you can up the gray a little bit. That's probably good. And we can call this our grass mask. Okay. I think I'm going to temporarily just put a green in here so we can see how these work. So we have I want my white areas to be my grass. So that means it's going to pick up whatever my foreground material is. And then I will have my rock material. Oops, that's a grayscale. We can't use that. Let's just get that gradient map in here now. We might as well take care of this. I'm going to put them together and then we'll colorize it. Okay. It's turning it into I just want to point this out. It's turning it into a color, even though it's still showing as black and white. So if you ever need to just take a grayscale map and for whatever reason convert it into a color map, you can just stick a gradient on there and leave it alone, and it'll work fine. But we're going to assign some colors to it. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing this. I'm not even going to pick a gradient. Because again, if you want to look at the ins and outs of how this gradient editor works, I have a tutorial for that. And right now, I'm just going to make a super simple rock-ish colored gradient. That's probably good enough for now. I just want to make sure that these dark lines stay dark for me. I always get so wrapped up in these. I keep telling myself I'm not going to do it, and then I keep doing it. So I will stop. But this gives us an idea of what that spread's going to be. That green is very green. But I think overall I'm liking the idea because I maybe a little bit less grass to rock ratio is really what I'm looking for right now. I think that's better. Okay. And we've already got our color set in, although, you know what? I want to flip that. It's just the way we've done this. I want this water to go on top of everything else, whether it's green or not, and we're going to put a transparency in there so it'll show up. But the way this stands now is that these are going to be black areas, and I would prefer to have this on top and run this through here. So I'm going to invert that. And I'll use that as the mask. And then we can put the watercolor on top and put this underneath. That's a pretty we'll worry about those edges later. I think we'll probably have to do a little bit more to this, but for now it'll do. Because I just want to set up the basic framework of it, and then we can start fiddling with the details. I don't think we ever set this up. I'm going Materials, Default, Edit, and even though we don't have any height set in there yet, I just want to make sure that my height does actually have a number in there. Otherwise, it won't show up. But yeah, I think that's a good start. So our masks are looking pretty good. And now I would like to take a break from all this substance stuff to go into Photoshop and actually create the material that I'm going to be using for this. So here we are in Photoshop, and this is a tiled texture that I made from things that I found on the internet. It's actually, I use it for grass, but it's actually a close-up of moss. So if you do a Google search for moss, you can probably make a reasonable facsimile for yourself. Now, we've got the color that we want, but we don't have any of the other things that we need, most specifically the normal map. Now, somewhere in Photoshop, there is, or at least used to be, a filter for making normal maps, and between you and me, it sucks. So what I do when a situation like this arises is that I actually make a grayscale map here in Photoshop, and then I use Substance to make a normal map for me. And let's do that now. I'm hitting Alt, and it's a background, so I'm going to just copy this and paste it in place. And now I've got an exact duplicate, and we can change this to a black and white. Now, depending on the image that you have, you can use this dialog here to great effect. Because what it allows you to do is take certain channels within your image and bump them up individually. And you can do a lot more precise stuff in here than you can with the levels later on. And this is one of the reasons why I like using Photoshop for this portion of it, because it may not be very good at making normal maps, but it's a lot better at doing this kind of stuff than Substance is. Right. And what I'm trying to do here is have my high areas the lightest and drop back the bits that are deepest. So I just bumped up the yellows because, as it happens in this particular case, the tops of those little bits of grass are a little bit yellower than the rest of it. This doesn't always work, but it does enough of the time that it's worth checking out. And I'm going to drop these greens back a bit. So I think that actually might be pretty good for our normal map, at least the start of it. Now, this is gonna be very, very rough if we use it like, well, we'll see. Let's take a look. This is giving us a lot of information. And at this point, it's ready to bring back out to Substance. I don't think I've ever shown you guys linking a Photoshop file, but you can. It's not something I do because what it's going to do, if you can link this entire file to Substance and save yourself the step of, saving stuff out individually. However, if you do that, it's going to remember this layer name as a file name. And if you're linking it and you change your layer name, or if you merge it with other layers or do other stuff to it, it's not going to like that one little bit. And just the way that I work, I use my Photoshop a lot as a scratch pad, so I'll mush things around, I'll split them apart, I'll merge them together, I'll see how I like it. And it's impossible to do layer by layer for me in Substance. It's just too complicated. And that's why I save them out separately. But if you feel comfortable keeping them all here in Photoshop and very carefully naming your layers and then not changing them, you can, in fact, bring in, we'll just, did I save this as anything? Let's just save this as a Photoshop file, and I'll just show you. It's probably easier than explaining it. So you would come in and do it as a bitmap. And it gives you a drop-down list, and you can pick and choose which layers you want to, which one. You don't want to do the whole thing, but then you can actually pick and choose the individual layers. And if that's how you want to do it, great. I'm not going to do it like this. I'm going to do it like this, and I'm going to save out a temp file so I can keep rewriting over it, because sometimes I'll be doing something and I'll have several of these that I want to do, and I'll just keep rewriting over the same file, and it'll just keep updating it for me in Substance. And it allows me to make a whole series of maps without too much trouble. So I'm going to now link this temp file, and it's created a resources folder for me, and I can drag out temp. I want to use it as a grayscale right now, so I'm going to switch it to grayscale. I'm going to come into my library, and I'm going to do height to normal. I'll link the two up, and this is crazy, crazy. And then we come down here, and we can just bring the height on this normal down till we get it where we want it. So probably something like that. And now I can save it out as its own PNG file, but I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard, and I want to make sure I'm at the resolution that, my highest resolution that I plan on using. So if you wanted to make like a 4K Photoshop folder, then do that. So make sure this parent size is set, because that's going to determine what this image is. So I copied it, and I can come back to my Photoshop and paste in place, and now I can just save it out as my normal file. And I'm thinking, although I didn't do it in my original test, we might have better luck doing a roughness map in here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invert this image. And let's see whether we can't tweak it. No. I'm going to leave it as is, and we can do the rest in substance. So this one I'm going to save as grass roughness. It may not work, but it's worth an experimental try. Okay. So we'll come back to it. We'll come back to our Explorer, right-click, link, bitmaps, and we'll bring these other two in. Oh, we never brought the grass in either. Okay. Okay. So the color map, we already have this, so we just replace that. And it looks pretty nice. And these other two we'll bring in, and as we start building out our material, we'll have them available. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of this. We'll put a frame around that. Before we continue on, I want to do a little house cleaning in here. These clouds especially are pretty labor intensive. We're getting some numbers in here that, you know, it's having a little bit of a hard time with them. I want to bring the size of this down. I don't really need this at parent size. You'll know, I mean, it's set relative to parent. You only have the choice between relative to parent and absolute because it has no input. So I'm going to set it down 1 off of parent size. Let's see what 2 off of parent size gives us. And this makes it a much lighter texture. But because all of, you know, these all inherited down the line. So we have to fix that. I'm also going to bring this one down. What we have to do is the next node in from here, we don't want to have its information relative to input. We want its size to always be relative to parent. And what that's going to do is it's going to take these, what we've now made lower res relative to parent, it's going to bump them back up to the correct size, but you'll notice that the calculations required here, it's a lot less milliseconds than I think it was like 20 something before. So we've really leaned it out with absolutely no detriment to our material, because we're using it as a big, broad, you know, mask. It's not like it's not like it needs all 2K of that detail. And because it's also connecting into here, I'm going to also make this relative to parent. And that's going to keep all the resolutions squared away down the line. Cells we're going to leave alone. We probably do need this at 2K. It's not taking up much room. This clouds, I think, can also be a lot smaller. I think we can go down 2 on this one as well. And we'll bring this one relative to parent. Because this is just defining broad areas of mask. So it's really, you know, we can adjust this a little bit if we want. And I think we'll tighten the levels up a bit and it'll be fine. Yeah. And, you know, you can see now there's no more orange anywhere. And that's good. And it's especially good when you're making something that's going to have an animation like we're doing. You really want it to be as lean as possible because it takes a lot more out of it. Okay. Now, let's address this puddle mask first and foremost. There's a couple of things going on here. These edges are too wide for me. So I'm going to bring in another levels node in here. And this will let us tighten them up a bit so they're not quite so broad and wishy-washy. Yeah, probably like that. And then the whole thing, these are puddles. These aren't deep pieces of water. So there's no place where this should be opaque completely. So I'm going to take this levels and I'm going to bring the whole thing darker. So there's really no pure white anywhere. And that makes it look a lot more transparent. Let's take a look at what it is at full puddle size. Yeah, it could be even less opaque. I should have done it the other. I keep doing that. I keep forgetting to apply it. I'm just going to do it here. Yeah, I mean, we can always change it later. It's kind of hard to do anymore now because it's all like the same. So let's do our normals first. I'm going to move my height next to my normal. And we're essentially going to copy the same idea as what's going on with our color. So the first thing we're dealing with, we have our rock. We have no normal map for that, so let's make one. We've got a height to normal right here. Let's see how this works. I'm going to just take a quick look here. Very smooth. I think we may end up putting, trying to think of what I want to do here. Yeah, I think a couple of things. Let's get a bevel in here. These things are just looking really flat and boring, and I want to try to do something about that. I'm going to get just the lines, and we can start by beveling the tops of these out a bit. And I also brought that size down a bit, because I think what we also want to do is on top of this, lay another noise. I'm going to get like black and white spots or something like that. It's not looking, it's not looking like it's dirt. It's not looking like it's rocks. It's just very flat. I don't like it. And let's blend these two together. So I'm going to replace this one, and we'll bring this down even further. And we can blend it with this normal using an overlay blend. Yeah, and that's starting to look a bit more like rocks. I mean, they're like all super duper shiny, but once we deal with that, I think I'm liking the shape a lot better. Okay. And this is our grass. So, okay, that's the rocks taken care of, for now at least. Yeah, I'm doing these rocks completely differently from my test thing because I really didn't like the way they came out on that, and I'd rather spend time doing it here with you guys than doing it by myself and then redoing it again. Let's get another blend node. Oh, I already have one. Okay, we don't need that. We've got a blend node here, and we'll now put this in as our background. We will put in our grass on top, and then we have our grass mask right here, and we'll plug that in. And we're not overlaying or anything like that because, wow, this is really hard to do without doing it. I'm going to do the other things first. No, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to put a gray here. This is very distracting having it all shiny like that. They're still very regular. Let's see what happens if we come back in here, now that we've got a different thing going on with the heights, if we move this warp up. I mean, they're not really cracks anymore, but it's giving a more jagged rock-like effect. Okay. The other thing that I want to see happen is, well, we'll take care of it in the heights when we get to it. We need to start to differentiate between the grass and the rock. And finally, we need to create another blend that will work along our puddle mask. This is only for the color because we want that color to be not 100% opaque. The actual mask, we're going to use this. And then the normal for this is going to be the normal that we're going to create when we do that effects map. But for right now, I'm just going to put in a normal color as a placeholder. And again, this isn't going to be, this is not going to have any kind of overlay or anything like that. It's a straight copy blend because we want to lay on top. And now it's starting to make a bit more sense. So the stuff that's underwater is completely flat. And then as we bring our puddle size down, it's picking up the appropriate normals. Okay, so that works. We'll make a frame around it. Oh, I was wondering why it looked so low res. I forgot to bump this up to parent size. Yeah. Next we have height. And this is going to be a little bit different because we don't want this same kind of busyness that we have in the normal map, in our height map. It's just going to turn it into a hot mess. So we really want to deal mostly just in these broad areas of the mask. But I don't also, by the same token, really want to use completely flat colors. And what I'm going to end up doing is just washing them out in one direction or another using level maps. So you have just a little bit of variation, but not much. Okay, so we're starting with the ground. Decide which one of these we want to use. Well, I think I want to use this clean, this one, to actually go, to dig in. So I have some pure blacks. And then the next thing we're going to put on top of that will be our grass. So we're actually cutting out one of these blends here. But and for the grass mask, for the grass, I think we're going to use I'm going to turn this into a grayscale and just wash it out. No, this one's reversed. So I'm going to get a gray, what do they call it? Grayscale conversion node, and take this color mask that we have, convert it to a grayscale, and then run it into this levels node and wash it out. I don't want to have all this variation in here. I really, really, really don't. But I also don't want it to be completely white. So it's just going to have these really subtle variations in it. And this one, we're going to just make really, really dark. And again, it's going to end up with subtle variations in it. They're just going in the opposite direction. And then we will use the grass mask, because the grass is what we have on top. Oops. So it's probably too much of a difference. Now, it's still happening underwater, and we don't want that. So the next one we're going to put in here is going to be for the water, and that one, it's all pretty shallow. I think I'm just going to make it black completely. Turn that into a grayscale. We'll make it black, and we'll use the Puddle Mask for that. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that's right. And that gets rid of all the stuff that's underwater. I mean, you could get really technical with it because theoretically stuff is sticking out, but honestly, that's really complicated. Yeah, so I think for now that's okay. It's starting to look more like what it needs to look like. So we can make a frame and move on to our roughness. Okay, so that's where this guy comes in. Although we should do the rock first. Let's do that first. These are going to be our roughest areas, these deep cracks. And I also have this inverted because, again, we're going to base it off of the higher areas are going to be a little bit shinier. The lower areas are going to be not so shiny. So we'll put these two together. And I think we'll try a lighten blend here. And we'll get a levels node because the whole thing is just way, way, way too shiny. And we'll bump up the roughness. But the white areas aren't going to get any whiter, which is why this is probably the easiest way of doing this. So that'll be our rocks. And now we have this guy, which we're going to turn into a grayscale and get a levels node. I just think the one in Substance does a better job sort of globally moving things up. And again, we can just bring everything up. I think grass is probably a little bit shinier than the rocks. And we'll use our grass mask. And then we get another blend node. And we'll bring this into the background. And I'm just going to get a plain old black. And that will be our water. So we'll use the Puddle Mask for that. And we'll pop that in there. That looks more like what we need it to look like now. So we've got the stuff underwater. We've got the stuff on top of the water looking reasonably okay. And let's see what happens as we move those puddle sizes down. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with those edges. I'm looking at the edges because I didn't want them too wide, but I think that's pretty good. And they don't get too wide as it goes down. It's just starting to look damp. Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the way that is going. I'm not really happy with the color in the rock. I think that gradient map could use a lot more work. But overall, I think it's okay. So let's make another frame. We could put a little metallic in the rock if we wanted to. See if we can do that quickly. I'm just going to take this guy right here and maybe do something like this to it. And get a blend node. And how am I going to do this? We want the grass to have nothing. I'm trying to not add nodes. We've already got a black here. I'm going to use this black, and we're going to put it on top of this rock using the grass. So any area that has grass will absolutely positively not have any metallic. And then we can do the same thing for the puddles. So we'll bring this in as the background. We'll use this same black. And then we'll use the Puddles Mask to block out any place that the water's in. And then this will be our metallic. You know, sometimes it's nice to put just, not make it shinier necessarily, but just put in some metallic, because rock very often does have metal in it, so it just kind of makes it for a nicer rock, I think, but in very small doses. Okay, I think we can move on to the effects map. Just add a frame here. Now, we could just pull out an effects map and start working on it here, but I don't want to do that because this is the kind of effects that, you know, you can potentially use over and over again. So let's come up in here and make a new substance, and we'll call this drop effects, and we'll make it empty.